The family of Michelle Troconis, who was sentenced last month in connection with the murder of Jennifer Dulos, is now speaking out. Channel 3's Eyewitness News reporter Marcy Jones reveals what the family wants everyone to know in a new statement.
This comes just 2 weeks after Michelle Troconis was sentenced to 14.5 years in prison for her role in the disappearance and presumed murder of Jennifer Dulos. Now, on behalf of Michelle Troconis, her family released a statement saying, in part, Michelle Troconis is an innocent woman who has been unjustly sentenced to prison for crimes she did not commit. This situation represents a significant injustice. Tragically, Michelle is bearing the consequences of actions perpetrated by Dulos, who ultimately took his own life to avoid prosecution for his alleged crimes. Michelle was a victim of Dulos, a manipulative, controlling, and deceitful individual who fabricated a false reality for his gain. Presented himself as a successful businessman, undergoing an amicable divorce. He deceived Michelle into leaving her beautiful life and moving to Connecticut by falsely claiming that Jennifer Dulos supported his new relationship with Michelle. Targeted Michelle as a successful, independent, kind, and caring single mother. Now, attorneys for Michelle Troconis have asked that she be released on bail pending the appeal of her conviction. In the studio, Marcy Jones, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.